Our topic today is the Aggadah in times of war and peace. But now we'll see a lot of the elements that we've already discussed coming into place, and that is the question of the historical context and the role of the rabbis within society, their agenda, what they're saying, how they're saying it, who are they talking to, and also in the case of the first Midrash that we're going to look at, we will see what I consider to be the most destructive Midrash ever, meaning the Midrash with the most tragic consequences that exist in our literature, and actually those consequences played out in a time that was not too long ago, recent history. So this is from Yalkut Shimoni. Yalkut Shimoni, if you recall, it's on page 30. Yalkut Shimoni was edited or created by Rabbi Shimon HaDarshan of Frankfurt in the 12th century, but it's a compilation of earlier Shimon, the Darshan of Frankfurt. We don't know if it's Frankfurt am Main or Frankfurt am Oder, but it's probably am Main. The Frankfurt on that was the big city, and this Midrash refers to a pasuk in Shir HaShirim. I didn't quote here the whole pasuk, but I'll say it. Hishbati etchen benot Yerushalayim. I've made you swear, daughters of Jerusalem. If you look at Shir HaShirim, you will see that this verse appears 3 times. And the full text of the verse is, I made you swear, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you shall not awaken and shall not rouse love until it will want to. Or in other words, don't hasten or don't try to push love. Let it grow naturally, which is a wonderful advice when it comes from parents or friends or even yourself, thinking, okay, maybe the time is not right. I'll wait.
Supremes.
What? The Supremes? Is it?
Can't hurry love.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. What was the song?
You just have to
no,
wait.
Right. You
Love
can't
doesn't
hurry
come
love.
easy.
No, you just. Oh, I was thinking. What was the song?
It's a game of give and take.
Right. So perfectly, they took it from Shir HaShirim. They took a lot of songs were taken from Shir HaShirim. So on its face, literal reading would say that the Benot Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem, are a choir, which is a very frequent theme in Greek theater, which brought some scholars to say that Shir HaShirim was written in the later period under the influence of Greek literature, but it's a different question. Because you have the Benot Yerushalayim, like the choir, and she talks to them. She searches for her beloved. She searches for her beloved, and once in a while she turns to them and says, "Don't get involved. Don't tell me what to do," which is, like I said, in the context of the true story, is very powerful. That she wants to find her true love on her own terms. But the Talmud, or one of the rabbis here, raises a question. Amar Rabbi Yosei bar Hanina, Shalosh Shvuot halalu lama. Why 3 oaths? Why does it have to repeat 3 times? I could have answered, it's a literary device. You say a phrase and you repeat it. It accentuates the story. It accentuates the narrative. It's done. It's a refrain. We use a refrain in a song. We use it in a story. Most commonly, it's used in stand-up comedy. When
1, 2, 3. Yes,
you go back to it, or in Chris Christie's speech yesterday. Guilty. Right? He coached the people to repeat this refrain. Anyway, so why 3 times? So Rabbi Yosef explains. Ahat, shishbi'a HaKadosh Baruch Hu et Yisrael shelo ya'alu b'choma. God made Israel swear not to climb the wall. Ahat, shishbi'a et Yisrael shelo yimredu be'umot ha'olam. He made Israel swear not to rebel against the nations. Ve'ahat, shishbi'a HaKadosh Baruch Hu et ha'umot shelo yishtabedu b'Yisrael yoter midai. He made the nations swear not to exaggerate with their subjugation of Israel. So, how do you understand these comments, these oaths, and any problems with the text? Any comments? Thinking about it.
I'm not clear.
Jewish history. Okay, yes.
Where are the oaths? Does that come from the pasuk?
Hishba'ati etchem, I have made you swear.
3 times.
The word leishava, the problem that in Hebrew, leishava, leashbia, and shvuah all come from the same root. Leishava is to take an oath. Leishava is to take an oath. It's hitpa'el. Shaveh.
Hifil.
But it's hifil, yes. Shavua is the noun. It's an oath. And lehashbia, that's the hifil. Lehashbia, no, that's binyan kal. Hishava nishba. That's the infinitive. Shema pe'ula. Lehishava, to swear or to take an oath. Shua is an oath. Lehashbia is to make another person. When I say ani mashbi'a otcha, is I want you to take an oath. That's the concept of lehashbiya.
Swear.
Just as lehalbish is to dress someone, lehashbiya is to oath someone. So we don't have the exact economic translation
So
in
can you
English.
repeat those 3 definitions again?
So there are 3. What this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, just the
Shavua.
shavua is an oath.
Oh, is it?
Lehashbiya is to make someone take an oath. It's much more economic in Hebrew. Lehashbiya, one word. Hifil, yeah. So there are 3 oaths. It repeats it 3 times in Shir HaShirim.
So, I mean, it would seem that this is an admonishment
Against
trying to become, basically rebel or have a revolution when you are not the sovereign power.
Okay, so it's a warning against sovereign power.
Well,
Do not
it's
try.
it's a warning against trying to get it on your own.
Right. So it would be in what context? Of when you're not independent, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're a colony, or you're
Right. You're a colony. You're oppressed. You're subjugated. Whatever it is. Textual problem of the Midrash itself. Any textual problem or logical problem? The way it enumerates the three oaths.
What does the third one mean?
Well, I mean, of course, in the third one, it's not for Israel.
Right. So, what will be a
That's a
it will be a problem?
What relationship does God have with other nations?
Right. It will be a problem with the pasuk because the pasuk uses the same formula. Hishba'ati etchem benot Yerushalayim. The people are in the dialogue are the same.
Right.
The girl
the chorus
and the choir and the chorus. The girl and the chorus. The girl and the chorus. And now you tell me, in the first 2 sentences, the girl is God and the chorus is Israel, and in the third one, it's God and the nation. So we're not consistent with our commentary of the pasuk. Because of that, we have other versions of this midrash, where the third one is also from God to Israel, and the shuvah is this: Shelo yidhaku et haketz. Do not press. I'm translating literally the end. Or in other words, do not try to bring Mashiach before its time. Do not try to bring.
This is in the Midrash? Or this is
in other versions of this Midrash.
Okay.
This Midrash appears in many different collections, many different compilations. Seems to me that this was the original, and this was a correction, a later correction, because of the rule. Even though the rule doesn't always it's not a rule that has no exception, but it's in certain manuscript you would go with that. It's called Lexio Difficilior in Latin, which means the more difficult reading is probably correct. The one that makes less sense is the original, and the one which is logical is a later correction that works with manuscripts. But it's not across the board, because it can happen the other way around, that the original reading, which makes more sense, had some kind of a political implication or an opinion that was not accepted, and then someone corrected it in order for it to fit the agenda, which happens. So this is an interesting rule, but I think that it applies here. So Now, when you think of Jewish history, do you see this Midrash playing out in Jewish history? In specific instances, locations?
Bar Kokhba.
Bar Kokhba? But actually, they went against the rule.
Right. Well, so you want to know when they followed it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, the rule impacted Jewish history. That people following this rule.
You saw this was compiled in the 12th century?
This was compiled in the 12th century, but it has a long
earlier.
history. It appears already in the Talmud. It's somewhere around the 3rd century where this first surfaces.
When was Masada?
70 to 73. Masada comes right after the destruction of the temple, which was 67 to 70, and then the rebels went to Masada and stayed there for 3 years until they were defeated. Committed suicide. Okay.
Okay, so
In recent history, I'm giving you a clue. What happened in recent history where this might have been a factor? In our recent history, I'm saying 100, 150 years, where people might have followed this rule and and made certain decisions in their national political life.
In Europe?
In Europe, what happened?
I mean, anything that was anti-Zionist.
Anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism is almost totally based on this Midrash. The anti-Zionist movement, which was mainly created and preached in Hungary and among the what is called the Uberland. You have in Hungary was divided into Unterland and Uberland, the lower region and the higher region. The higher region closer to Germany, the lower region closer to Eastern Europe. And the rabbis there were the Unterland, the one that were closer to Eastern Europe, were anti-Zionist. And when people came and asked their rabbis, should we go to Israel? Back then Palestine, they said no. Why? People asked two questions. And they had two options. Should we go to America? Should we go to Israel? The answer when people asked, should we go to America, was no. Why? Because you're going to lose your faith and your religion. It's the land with everything is allowed. There are no boundaries. You're going to assimilate. When they asked, should we go to Israel, the answer was no, because it's against God's will. God does not want you to go to Israel. God wants you to stay in diaspora. Don't you see that in the pasuk? God says, "Do not climb the wall. Do not go against the nations. Do not try to bring Mashiach before its time." This is the version that floated later on, that people knew of. The Jews couldn't really affect the nations to tell them, "Oh, you have to keep your part of the deal."
Right? Could you imagine?
Right? Even though it is in post-Holocaust literature and pro-Zionist literature, when people tried to justify how can we go against this midrash, they said the contract is broken because the nations did not fulfill their part. They look what they did to us. The question is, do we really need that? What was the intention of the original midrash? So this really had a major impact on Jews especially in Europe. Especially in Europe. In Islamic countries, it was different. Part of it, as I mentioned before, from the beginning, those boundaries between Jews and non-Jews were not as clear. Because they were not necessary, because Jews didn't feel the threat from Islam the way they felt the threat from Christianity. It was a theological threat because Christianity for them was considered idolatry, whereas Islam is not considered idolatry. There was a national threat in the sense of also stemming from religion, that Christians saw Jews as the killers of God, and this did not exist in Islam. And also there was a cultural boundary, because the first immigrants to Europe were Middle Easterners. They were, just like today, the influx of immigrants from Turkey and Syria arrives at Germany, and there are different cultural differences. It's the same thing with the Jews who first came. They were Mediterranean Jews. So they were not very well accepted and we have evidence of certain disputes between Jews and non-Jews were written by Jewish German scholars who speak about the non-Jews mocking the Jews for their dark complexion, dark hair, black eyes. Like you look different. It took time until they assimilated into the community and at least looked the same. It happened everywhere the Jews went, but for Jews living in the Islamic continuum, they spoke Arabic or Aramaic or Hebrew, sister languages. So all these things caused this separation. And Jews were definitely more subdued and subjugated in Europe, so they never had the ability to create their own military power. You know of the feudal system, right? In the feudal system, you had you either were a nobleman, or a mercenary, or a serf. The Jews originally were farmers, but then when they were pushed out of it, the only thing that they were allowed to do was moneylenders, because Christians would not deal with money lending because it's forbidden. But for the Jews, there was a loophole. You're not allowed to lend money with usury, charging interest to Jews, but you could do it with non-Jews because they will charge you as well. Anyway, that was not a very pleasant situation for the Jews, but they were forbidden from carrying arms. In the Muslim world, on the other hand, for many years in different locations, Jews did have some kind of independent states, and they were leading armies in the Arabian Peninsula, which is now called Saudi Arabia. Back then it was called the Hijaz. There was a Jewish presence until the rise of Islam, with its own country called Haibar, and a king, Yosef Dunawas, and an army. And the same thing happened in Morocco. There were the actually opposition to the Muslim invasion was led by Jewish and Berber warriors. But later on in Islamic countries, when we move past the 1400s, the same mentality also took root, where we're not supposed to defend ourselves. Whatever the non-Jews do to us, we have to accept. The only way that we could fight that is by lobbying. There was actually a special position called Shtadlan. It's from an Aramaic word. Shtadlan is a lobbyist. It's still used in modern Hebrew. It's funny. It came from the medieval Hebrew. They called I think it's called the Shtadlan, the one who goes from Hebrew to talk to the non-Jews, and he usually was a money lender who gave large loans to kings and princes in order to conduct their wars. Usually those people would end up being executed, or the king would declare bankruptcy and say, I cannot pay you back. It was a very dangerous profession, but they did it despite all that. In modern Israel, they took from the word shtadlan the new word for lobby. It's called shdulah. So in any this is the only thing. The only way that Jews could defend themselves was this. So throughout history, Jews usually did not stand up for themselves. If you couple that with the concept of martyrdom, that was more rampant in the Christian world, you understand why Jews in Europe would rather sacrifice their lives than try to escape. Because that would have been a good option, wouldn't it? If the non-Jews give you an option, either convert to Christianity or die. There's a third way. You could run away. You could move out of the country. But
it wasn't easy to travel.
It wasn't easy, but it's easier than dying.
Yes.
Yeah, it's easier than dying. You could, at a certain point, Jews did when King Kazimir, whatever it's called, Kazimir of Poland, allowed Jews to move to Poland. A lot of Jews left Germany and went to Poland because they saw the promise there. But other than that, you see the main difference between Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews in that context. In in their response to what we call shmad, or the attempt to convert them, mass conversions or those kind of crusades, where in Germany the overwhelming response was sacrificing your life, including that of one's children, based on the interpretation of the Aggadah as the ideal. Maybe we'll touch on that in a second. The Aggadah was the ideal. That we see the Aggadah today as something that did not come to fruition. God told Abram to sacrifice his son, but eventually he did not. So it was a message to Abraham that God is not interested in human sacrifices. But in medieval Europe, because of the influence of Christianity, this was perceived as a failure. Abraham fails to sacrifice his son. This is not good. Have you ever thought of that in that way? Yeah? That it is a failure. Especially when you're confronted with Christian theology, where Jesus does sacrifice his life, and all the martyrs that died by the hands of the Romans, and even as late as the 11th century, there was a movement in Spain. Even though in Spain there was Spain was and what we call Andalusia was under the more tolerant rules of the Muslims. There were Christians who rebelled against the Muslims in Cordoba, in Spain, in order to be executed. They wanted to set an example to show we don't care for your religion. So 3 midrashim, they're not written here, but I think they're related. 3 solutions were given to the problem of why did Abraham not sacrifice his son. There were 3 different commentaries, all come from medieval Europe, and all deal with the question, how come the Aggadah concluded without Abraham sacrificing his son? So in one midrash, there's another sacrifice that's being made instead of Yitzhak. Someone else dies instead of Yitzhak, and actually, I think it's written in Rashi. It's some of the midrashim that people learn when they put. So who's the person who died instead of Yitzhak? Exactly, according to the Midrash, exactly at the same time of the Aggadah? Sarah. According to the Midrash, when during the Aggadah, Satan, the devil, opens up the heavens, right? Or puts her on FaceTime, and she sees the Aggadah, and she thinks that her son is going to die, and she passes out and she dies, right? But in a later rendition of this midrash, it seems like a deliberate act. She says, God forbid, God forbid, she's afraid of the situation where my sacrifices was not accepted by God. I offered my son to God, and he rejected the sacrifice. This is not good. I have to offer a substitute. And she commits suicide. This is one interpretation. And that interpretation is found in Da'at Zekanim. If you look at Mikrot Gdolot, there's a commentary called Da'at Zekanim. It's compiled from commentaries by Ba'alat Tosafot from that period, and they say that. Another alternative ending to the story doesn't give a substitute sacrifice, but rather says that the original sacrifice was made. So who died?
Isaac.
Yitzhak, right, himself. How is that possible? You ever heard of the Midrash like that?
Yeah.
When he came back to life?
Yes, and it appears in Ashkenazi liturgy where Avraham is described as slaughtering his son, and then he revives because Yitzhak comes back to life because the angels are crying. Yarad taltehi alav v'nithaya. This is the word of the poem of this liturgical piece, that the angels were crying, and the tears of the angel healed the wound. It's very science fiction and fantasy,
Disneyland.
right? Very
Yeah.
Disneyland, right? See that? So the wound is healed, and then Avraham says, "Woe to me! I didn't do the sacrifice. I have to do it right." The same problem of Sarah, that my sacrifice is rejected, and he takes the knife and he's about to slaughter Yitzhak again, and then the divine river comes and snatches Yitzhak and saves him from his father. And then God tells Abraham, "It's okay. You don't have to do that." In the third alternative, there's none of that. Meaning, there's no substitute sacrifice. Yitzhak is not sacrificed, but there's regret. Abraham deeply regrets what happened. And here is how the Midrash works it out. And if you remind me, I'll send you, even the sources of all these Midrashim. The Midrash says that after Abraham comes back from the Aggadah, the Torah says that Abraham comes back from the Aggadah, and then he's told that his brother had children, and the granddaughter Rivka was born. The Torah puts it in next to each other. They're juxtaposed. Not necessarily happened at the same time, but this is what the Seder Olam says. It did happen at the same time. So according to this Midrashic interpretation, why is the message about Rivka's birth written immediately after the Aggadah? Because Abraham was thinking, as he was walking back from Har Moriah back home, he was thinking that if the Aggadah would have ended with a sacrifice, he would have no grandchildren. His dynasty would have died with Yitzhak. And once, as he was thinking that, he was told, "You have a future daughter-in-law." That's the original Midrash. But it was taken out of context and distorted by the author of a later commentary called Shem Mishmuel. That's the name of the book. Maybe 16th century. And he says Abraham's regret was different. Abraham was thinking the following. He said, if Yitzhak was already married and he would have had children, then what?
He would have grandchildren already.
And therefore,
it would be okay to sacrifice him.
Yes. He would be able to sacrifice him. He says, what a shame. If I had grandchildren already, I would be able to sacrifice my son. Right? What a missed opportunity. It's hard to think that, but this is the way you have medieval European rabbis writing. They write about the possibilities of fulfilling the Aggadah. So sacrificing your life was a completely accepted choice. This is what you have to do. It's the other way around. It's running away that is not good. I remember several years ago, probably 2005 or something, that Rob Ashman of the Jewish Journal had an initiative of doing a Torah slam. I don't know if they repeated that, maybe twice. So it was a symposium of rabbis of different denominations, almost like the joke, conservative, reform, and an Orthodox rabbi. And then they would also throw in the Sephardic rabbi and the Chabad rabbi, and to represent all denominations. And the discussion was, the topic of the discussion was Untane Tokef. Untane Tokef is a beautiful prayer. You all say it, right? So everybody, each speaker discussed the prayer from a different aspect. And then when I spoke, I said that we don't say it. We don't say it. Some people were surprised that how come you don't say this tefillah? And I said I think part of it is because it does not sit well with Sephardic theology. The backstory. The tefillah is one thing. The backstory is, how the tefillah was composed? What the story is? So according to tradition, which is probably wrong in this case, because of I'm saying it's wrong not because I do not accept traditions, but the traditions puts the composition of that poem in the 12th century, and the language is clearly 7th, 8th century Israel, and not Europe. In any case, the story is that Rabbi Amnon of Mainz was summoned to the bishop of the city, and he was told that he has an option to convert or to Christianity or to be executed. And Rabbi Amnon said, "Give me 3 days, I need to think about it." Then he went home, and the moment he got home, he was filled with regret, with remorse for not saying right away, "Kill me." He said, by saying, give me 3 days, I gave him the impression that there is a possibility, there is a chance that I will convert to Christianity. So he went back to the palace, and he told the bishop, in front of everyone, in defiance, I will not convert to Christianity. So the bishop tortured him by amputating his limbs one by one. It's fit for medieval horror stories, but a lot of them was true. Rulers did torture their victims horribly, and when they took him home bleeding, on his deathbed he composed Unetane Tokef, and that's the backstory. I hope I didn't spoil for you the singing of Unetane Tokef in the next Yom Kippur. The problem with this story, like I said, first is the textual analysis of the liturgy shows that it doesn't come from medieval Europe. Second, there's a practical problem from a medical point of view. Someone whose all limbs were amputated cannot make it back home. Can't. I don't think it's probably immediate death. So I said that, and then we spoke about the whole concept of the poem is that you have to accept God's verdict. Almost saying there's no free will. God had determined for you whom by fire, whom by water, right, and so on. So that was, and I said there was some of this ideology somehow also passed over to the Sephardic side, but was more evident in the Ashkenazi world. When the Zionist movement started after the emancipation, and after the emancipation was one stage towards Zionism, but the what really prompted this the movement was that there was a pushback after the emancipation. What happened was that the Jews were being pushed out of Europe because the emancipation brought about emancipation and enlightenment, and the spring of the nations was that we're all equal. Pan-European vision, but the Jews didn't fit in because they couldn't be, as Jews, they were aliens, and when they tried to become German or French or whatever it is, they were told you don't belong, because then the byproduct of emancipation was a push for nationalism, and nationalism where each and every nation looked for its own characteristics. It is evident in music, some call it romanticism, but it's in music, in the people like Brahms and Bartok compose music which is very folkloristic, very local, Chopin with his polkas, each one, and the same with literature. The Jews don't belong, so they either try to assimilate and become European, or they become distinctively Jewish and they have to leave, and they leave to Israel. And into all that mix comes the attitude of this Midrash. Like after we go through this historical background that is being built and accumulated over centuries and thousands of years, the rabbis say you cannot go to Eretz Israel. This whole movement of rebelling against the nation is not good. They do see they have something to rely on when they look around them. You know of the Russian pogroms in before World War I. It was 1907 to 1911. Terrible pogroms in Russia. So the Jews said we have to move. Many Jews said we have to move out of Russia. The rabbi said, "This is your punishment. You upset the non-Jews. You think that you're independent. You think you could go to Israel. They are now punishing you. You should become more reclusive, more submissive." there was the dynamics that was going on in Europe, and as a result, even when the signs of the Holocaust were already evident, many chose to stay in Europe. Post-Holocaust, there was one rabbi who was very vocal with actually two rabbis. One of them survived the Holocaust, one of them did not. One is Rabbi Dov Weissmandel, who after the Holocaust came and settled in America, but he was of course frustrated, depressed at the end of his days for not being able to influence Jews in Europe to do more, and not being able to influence the United States and the Allies to bombard the concentration camps. Because he was able to smuggle from within Germany, he wrote the exact locations and what is happening in the camps in rabbinic language. All the letters were read. He did it from the ghetto, and he was able to write it in rabbinic language, like a sugya from the Talmud, and he sent all this information to relatives in the United States, which presented to the government, but the government chose not to do anything about that. The other rabbi was Rabbi Sachar Shlomo Teichtal, also Hungarian, an Hungarian Jew, who before the Holocaust was an anti-Zionist. During the Holocaust, he sort of woke up from that, and he was going from synagogue to synagogue, telling Hungarian Jews to get up, either fight or leave the country. And as we know very well, most of them did not do that. And it was extremely tragic because the Germans entered Hungary only in 1943. So they knew already the end is near, and they sped up the destruction of Hungarian Jewry. And you think about the great luminaries who came from there, Elie Wiesel from Marmoreh Siget, but also all of the Hasidic rabbis came from the same area. Rabbi Teichtal wrote towards the end, before he was killed by the Nazis, he wrote a book called Ema Banim Smicha. The mother of the children is joyous, is rejoicing, pasuk from the Hallel, where he blamed the rabbinic leadership for misleading the people, for not seeing the signs, and for telling people to stay in Europe. A couple of years ago, the book was republished by his grandchildren, who are now ultra-Orthodox and anti-Zionist, and live in Israel, and they respected their great-grandfather, meaning they did not alter the text, but they said that he spoke out of at different times. It was mentally depressed and stressed, and we have to understand why he wrote that. But definitely, they don't stand by it, and that's also the reason that post-Holocaust, the Orthodox community was very, very slow to discuss the theological implications of the Holocaust and to include any kind of prayers in their liturgy. It took 20, 30 years, if not more, for them to acknowledge that something happened, because they, on one hand, they have to believe this is God's hand, this is what God wanted. On the other hand, to say that this is what God wanted is it's a very heavy burden. It's condemning, it's damning, it's terrible. Then to say that it's our fault for not fighting back or for not trying to flee is another problem. And when we talk about Hungarian and Romanian Jewry, you have another tragic case of the Belz Rebbe, the Rabbi of Belz, who's on the border of Romania and Hungary, who fled the country with his brother before the Nazis invaded, and assured his followers that everything is going to be fine. He said, me and my brother, we're just going to Israel because we long to perform this kind of pilgrimage and be there. But you stay here, everything is going to be okay. We have the original text, and we have the doctor text that was published by the Hasidim, because even they knew that they better not write it. So we have all these things happening in Europe, and then the famous event of rebellion against the Nazis. What is the Warsaw Ghetto rebellion or uprising? In Hebrew, it's called Meret Ghetto Varsha. the uprising and get in the Warsaw Ghetto, and it has been memorialized in what day? Yom HaShoah, right? Which is the full name of Yom HaShoah is Yom HaShoah ve'Gvura. Yom HaShoah, right? The Holocaust, ve'Gvura. Gvura, heroism, right? How does the Orthodox community celebrate or commemorate Yom HaShoah ve'Gvura? The non-Zionist community. How do they celebrate that? Do you know? You have no idea. You have no idea what, it's the 27th of Nisan. You have no idea what Orthodox Jews who do not consider them modern Orthodox or Zionist Orthodox, you have no idea what they do on that day. Nothing. They just go about their business. And if they live in Israel and the sirens go off for people to stand a moment of silence, they walk in the streets defiantly to show that we don't accept your commemorations. That's what they say. This is a secular day. It's not our day. In reality, this is what bothers them. Heroism. Heroism because you claim that you could have done something, that you could have stood up and defend yourself. This is rubbish. This is total nonsense. The people in Israel, the Hasidic leaders who talk to the PLO, right? Their argument is that if there was no state of Israel, Israel would have been much safer. So if we lived here now under the rule of the Muslims, we would have been much safer. Which could have been an argument maybe until 10 years ago, before the Arab Spring. But now when you see what is happening in Syria, in Libya, and in other countries, you realize that no one would have been safe in the Middle East. We could say that the establishment of the State of Israel created problems, but one cannot say that those are divine actions, that God is punishing. That's how they exceed, that God is punishing the Jews for establishing the State of Israel against His will. And all Hasidic movements are anti-Zionist today. There was one Hasidic movement that was not. It died out. And even Lubavitch, the people think Lubavitch is pro-Israel. It's pro-Israel, but it's not Zionist.
Right.
The Rabbi never went to visit Israel. And there was never a Lubavitch candidate for the Knesset or for the government, which does not make sense, because they, with their popularity in Israel, could have put someone there with great ease. And that's part of the thing. They believe you cannot bring Mashiach before its time. What happened in the Warsaw Ghetto was interesting in terms of how the Orthodox community, for a short while, woke up from that, I would call it numbness or apathy. And that was thanks to one rabbi. His name was Menachem Zemba. Who was the leader of the Hasidim of Gur, Polish Hasidic court in the Warsaw Ghetto. And at a certain point, he issued what is called a kol koreh, a call to the people, a pamphlet, where he said that this concept, Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, no longer applies. It's a very bold statement. Kiddush Hashem was a central concept in Jewish theology for thousands of years. We have to sanctify God. It appears in the Tanakh. It's all over the Tanakh, not in the same sense that it later came to represent, but people spoke about sanctifying God's name either by dying or by taking actions that people praise and therefore sanctify God's name. He said this doesn't apply anymore. He says, you know why? Because the Nazis are not there to convert us to their religion. Their goal is to annihilate us completely. He tried to reason with people. He said, you realize that if the Nazis get their goal, there will be no Jew left to sanctify God's name. Who are you sanctifying it for? So what he argued was that it is maybe for individuals to set an example for others to follow, and to adhere to the laws, and to be observant Jews, or to be a light to the nations. But if you all die, it doesn't happen. So he coined a new term, that the Orthodox community after the Warsaw Ghetto abandoned, but it was picked up by some groups in Israel, and that's called Kiddush. What did I put here? Self Kiddush Hashem. Yeah.
Nice.
Kiddush Haim. Sanctify life. You have to live, because if you're alive, then you could do whatever Hashem wants you to do. But if you're dead, there's nothing you can do. So that was the struggle that they had. Now, in a you could call it a twist of events, or just history bearing down on people. 70 years almost after the establishment of the State of Israel, more and more people in the Haredi community understand that this is the right way to do things. Yeah, women, with all the political problems that we have, with all the terrorist attacks, whatever is happening, they realize that if you live in a country and you have sovereignty, you have to contribute to the military effort of this country, and you have to be part of society. So the leaders, the rabbis of the old generation and their disciples are still adamantly against the mandatory draft or anything like that. But their people, their constituency, not so much. It's changes slowly. One of the indicators that this is happening was in the previous elections, where one of the parties was promoting, its platform was mandatory draft. You know how it works in Israel? There's a mandatory draft unless you study in a yeshiva, and then you could come and get an exemption for 1 year. At the end of the year, you come again, and you file the papers, and you get another year. And it goes on until you reach a certain age, or until you decide to get drafted. So I went through this process because I was brainwashed in high school. I was in a normal high school, and I came from a family that everybody served in the army, and my grandfather was in the underground, a very Zionist family. And in high school, my rabbis pushed me towards what they call Black Hat Yeshiva and the Zionist Yeshiva, and I decided not to go to the army. But I always felt that this is not the right thing to do, and I have to do this from point. And I promised myself that once I decide that I'm going into normal life and I'm going to work, I will do my military service first. And that's what I did. And immediately I was rejected. Not by the army, by my friends in yeshiva. Right? I met a friend, where are you now? I'm about to get drafted. And he looks at me as I've committed the greatest sin in the world. I'm a heretic. And I had to tell him, no, it's because I'm planning to leave Israel, and I want to do it correctly. Like, I had to apologize. I just didn't want to raise any issues with him. For me, it was relatively easy because I lived in a mixed neighborhood. So the problems came from my friends in yeshiva that didn't live where I lived. But where I lived, people were of all different factions. But recently, with people who serve in the army, who came from tight-knit Orthodox communities, that has been very, very difficult. They come back to their neighborhood, they're being attacked verbally and physically. And they are called Hardakim, which is a combination of the word Haredi, Orthodox, and virus. They're being described as a disease. Yes, there is a pushback. But what I said before, that I see the undercurrents which are changing, that when this political party, I think it was Mifleget Yesh Atid or something, whatever, said that it wants to establish a mandatory draft for all 18-year-olds, everybody thought that the Haredi community, the Orthodox community, will vote en masse to the other parties, and that the religious party will get more votes because people are afraid of what is going to happen. not only didn't happen, the Orthodox parties did not get more votes, and the party which said that the one which was clamoring for mandatory draft got more votes. Where did it come from? And I believe that those are the young men who say, enough, we don't want to live in that kind of separation, we want to be part of society. So now, okay, this is how the Midrash played out. Sorry, we sort of digress a little bit into modern Jewish history, but it's important because for us to understand what are the undercurrents in modern Israeli politics in Israel and abroad.
Well, and also, what are the applications of these midrashim?
Right, and ramification, right. Something. So, like when I asked about the historical context, you mentioned Mered Bar Kochva, right? So then you answered the question actually of when was this midrash written? We don't know exactly, but we know that it was written. I mean, actually, I do know exactly. I mean, I do have a. I mean, the first time I looked at it, I didn't know exactly. Then I found a historical marker. And the reason I didn't know exactly originally was those are very vague claims, very vague arguments. Oaths. Do not climb the wall. Seems like there's a division between you and the nations, so do not try. It's just like sound like don't breach the fences, right? The wall is a metaphor everywhere. The Great Wall of China, the Great Wall of Donald Trump, the Great Wall of Pink Floyd, right? It's always it's the Wall of Berlin. Another break in the wall. It's always this divider that cuts cultures and people from apart from each other. But so there's the general term: do not rebel against the nations. Do not try to bring Mashiach against before its time. So it seems like really coming from that time of many wars and struggles in Israel, and the one that was most dense with wars. If we put a quick timeline here, so around 160, that's BC, we have the Hashmonean War. A little later, around the year 30 BC, we have a civil war between the descendants of the Hashmonean dynasty, and they call in the Romans for help. And relatively from this year 30 BCE to the year 67, there's relative calm. From 67 to 69, you have the destruction of the temple. 70 to 73 is Masada. 112 to 115 is the what is called the revolt or the uprising of the diaspora, which was centered in Kyrene and Crete and the islands around in the Mediterranean where there were Jewish colonies. And then in 132 to 135, the Bar Kochba revolt. And the cumulative result of all that was, by that time, the Jewish presence in Israel had all but disappeared. They were Jews, but they were under the yoke of the Romans. There was no way for them to recover. They recovered a little bit, but almost completely, some say, between 70 and 132. They had 60 years of recovery with this happening outside Israel. But after this, that's it. No more. And still there were people who wanted to fight. Still there were people who said, we will fight till the last drop of blood, till the last soldier. The rabbis, like I mentioned before when we spoke about the difference between the Greek and the Roman Empire, the rabbis realized that this is not going to happen. They realized that we are up against an enemy which cannot be defeated. The Greeks were a fragmented empire. There was a local government in Syria, and Antiochia, who fought the Jews, and we, through guerrilla warfare, were able to annoy them enough for them to say, leave us alone, have your autonomy, and we will sort of live, we'll live together with cold peace like Israel and Egypt right now. Not too friendly, but not but it was respecting each other. The Romans were this great empire that needs to collect tax from all over the empire and cannot allow one province to break the mold and to become independent. So the Romans poured all of their armies into this stubborn province, and that's why they built the victory arch, right? The Titus arch in Rome, to celebrate the victory over the Jews. Why was it so important? Why was it so important? Because
It's the first domino. They didn't let the first domino fall.
right, no other nations gave the Romans such trouble. And you know what is the unique thing about the war of the Romans against the Jews? The Romans did one thing they did not do in any other country, in any other battle zone. They did something that we remember till today, but they never did it anywhere else.
Destroyed the temple.
Yeah. The Romans did not destroy temples. You know why? Because they were pagans. Why would you upset the local god? Even though you're fighting with his people, right? But if you defeat his people, then he should be on your side. You don't want to upset him by destroying his temple. The Greeks did not destroy any temple. They rebuilt temples. And the Romans did the same. They renovated local temples. As a matter of fact, the famous menorah that everybody draws, you know, I'm not good at that. But it's not at all what it should have been according to the description in the Tanakh. And scholars were struggling with that. How come, we have the menorah with like 3 steps going up, and it looks like, it has it's a pentagon or a hectagon. I don't know how many facets those stairs have, but it doesn't fit the biblical description. And then when they studied the reliefs more in detail, it was even more surprising because the characters on the basis of the menorah are pagan. You have dragons, you have winged creatures. It's very, very strange. Finally, one of my professors in Bar Ilan, Daniel Sperber, was able to prove that the team of artists that worked on the menorah under Herod was imported from Asia Minor. And they just finished building a church, or a pagan temple in Turkey, and they were imported to Israel. So the Jews do the same thing. Just do what you know. So it was not in the interest of the Romans to destroy the temple, and we have a documented, corroborated information between what we have from Josephus, Yosef ben Matityahu, or Josephus Flavius, which was a sort of a for hire historian. You know, he defected from being a general in the Jewish army to become a servant for the Romans, and he documented the wars. So between his descriptions and Roman historians, we know that Titus and Vespasian were reluctant to destroy the temple, but eventually they saw that they have no other way to subdue the Jewish spirit, and they destroyed the temple. And even with that, they kept going. The rabbi said, "Enough already. This is disastrous. You're going to kill everyone. So you have to anchor, like we saw before. You can't come and say, listen, as a rabbi, I'm telling you, stop fighting. What do you know about war? What do you know about politics?" Rabbis are being told that. We will listen to your advice when we want it. When we don't want it, we'll tell you, what do you know about this? What do you know about this? What do you know about that? Or, I'll send you later on to a chapter in Jeremiah. Jeremiah, the prophet of destruction, who always tells people, you're facing destruction, but, change your ways, repent. And when it happens, he has this sad role of saying, I told you so, right? After all that, people come to him and say, should we stay in Israel after the destruction or go to Egypt? And he says, why are you asking me? You never listen to me, right? Listen, we promise, we'll listen to you. Just ask God, and we'll listen to you. Yes?
I'm trying to understand the
Ishbati.
Ishbati. How that has any context in this 3 oaths? Like, why are they bringing?
It's like a contract between God and the Jews. God tells us, I make you swear. I need you to promise me under oath that you're not going to fight the nations.
But
and this is
something
binding
totally out of context.
completely. Oh, you want to see
I
how
mean,
it
you swear
in
to
the
God.
context of Shir Hashirim?
That's what I'm saying.
No way.
That's what I'm trying to
There's
understand.
no way to fit it into the context of Shir Hashirim.
So how are they putting this together?
No need for context. It's the concept is historical. It's like we said with Avraham, right? Avraham doesn't want to be circumcised. How does it work with the context of the narrative? Doesn't. There's an agenda, and there's the agenda. The agenda is, I want to stop people from fighting. What happened with Jeremiah? He said, you never listen to me. They said, no, we promise, ask God. Whatever God tells you to do, we will follow. He asks God. He comes back with the answer. What do they say? Sheker ata dover. You're a liar. God didn't speak to you. I mean, if God would have spoken to you, of course we would listen, because that's what we promised you, that we will listen to you. But God didn't speak to you. They find a way to bypass it. So the same with the rabbis. Like the famous story of Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai going to talk to the Romans. They wouldn't listen to them if they would just come and say plainly, you should not fight. So they created it into, they connected to Shir HaShirim, they make it sort of prophetic, and they say there are 3 oaths. Now, there is eventually, yes?
Just to
Yes.
again, to further understand, then basically you could attach your agenda to anything
Yes.
textual that we could remotely put together, kind of, sort of, maybe
Yeah, of course.
not really, and put your agenda out there, and it will be listened to because it has some textual
Yes.
authority.
Yes.
Because I think this
Because
is
it's biblical, it's God's word, yes.
because in this, I've been to Daughters of Jerusalem to be, wasn't it like to be fearful of love, like don't right? That's what you said at the beginning. To be fearful.
Right.
I wrote like a whole paper
Right.
on Song of Songs. So I just don't understand. It just
Perfect.
It's a whole different.
If you were there, as we say, if you were there when the rabbi gave the lecture, and you would be one of the listeners, and you know your Shir HaShirim, you would walk up to the rabbi and say, I'm sorry, it doesn't work for me. How do I explain that? Right? And he would have told you, there's a double meaning. There's the context of the story, and there's a higher meaning on a prophecy level that God wants to deliver. And you would have to accept it, because you back then you would have been a believer. Right now you're a heretic.
I just feel like there's other ways to what?
I just said that you're a heretic.
Yes, I heard that, but I'm not a heretic. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, I agree with you.
The only thing is,
It does not make any
But
sense.
here's the thing: is if they were trying to justify that not to go to war,
Yeah.
there are, I think, other contexts in which they could have grabbed that would have made more sense other
Right.
than this.
It doesn't
Song of
matter.
Songs
Right.
is a whole. It just.
No,
it's
actually, this is a good. Yes,
I
Josh.
was going to
Right.
say, so imagine in the text you read a passage and it said, take that rock and roll it over that hole. And then they use that to defend music
Right.
because of the existence of the words rock and roll.
Yes.
Totally out of context. Right? Same thing, right? So this is how, yes, so
No, but
right,
I mean,
you're spot
but
on.
in this particular line,
So
this is like, it's like apples and
right.
you know
It's
what I mean?
easier.
A lot of
It's
them are like
easier
this.
to connect your message to an esoteric text, because the rabbis were telling people the Shir HaShirim cannot be taken literally.
Right.
Now we have
I remember hearing
poetic
that somewhere.
liberty, poetic
Yes.
freedom.
Yes.
Okay. So now, use your powers of witchcraft and wizardry and look for the words Ilia Capitolina. Have you ever heard the words Ilia Capitolina? No?
Yeah, what's the name of Jerusalem?
Of Jerusalem. And what? Look at it. What century was it? Ilia Capitolina was a name. It means the holy, the sacred hills. And that was the name of Yerushalayim.
But it's spelled with an A, right?
No, if you write Ilia Capitolina, you'll
Yeah,
find it.
AE.
Ilya
A
Capitolina,
Roman colony
right, of Jerusalem,
built under Emperor Hadrian on
Yes.
the site of Jerusalem,
right?
which was in ruins since the siege of 70 AD, leading in part to the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Ilya Capitolina remained the official name of Jerusalem until 638 AD when the Arabs conquered the city. But the restrictions put on Ilya Capitolina were not held in place till the 7th century. It was a short period, about 100 years, where there were very strict rules about Ilia Capitolina. The Romans renamed the city Ilia Capitolina to give it the pagan status. They built a Zeus temple instead of our temple. And one more thing, there were certain type of people who were not allowed in the city, namely Jews and Christians, right? Or circumcised people were not allowed into the city. If you were caught in the city and you're circumcised, you will be tortured and executed.
Whose rule this was?
The Romans.
But how would they know about the women?
So didn't affect the women, and women are smarter than that. They will not try to look at the movement of those who try to go to Rabbi. I think 95% are men. Women are not trying to do that. Do I make sense? You think so? I think it's. I don't know. I think it's true. I think that women can find spirituality anywhere, and men are more. And also like about the ego. We have to conquer. We have to show this. So people tried, literally, to climb the wall. So when you were asked before, it hit me at a certain point. I'm trying to figure out when exactly of all these events that I mentioned, the year 70, the year 112, 135, when did it happen? So it happened when Jerusalem became Ilia Capitolina and entrance was denied anyone who's circumcised. And that really upset the freedom fighters or the liberty fighters or the zealots, as we call them, or the Sikari, the one who are holding daggers, the dagger holders.
So this happened right after Ilia.
Right after Ilia Capitolina. This statement. I believe that this statement, because if I just go by the name of the rabbi, we know that I told that people mix and match, the author, and not always we have the authentic voice behind the statement. But the La'alot Bahoma, to climb the wall, is a very accurate historical marker. We know it happened after the year 70, and during the period in which entrance was denied to circumcised people. There was only one day during the year where Jews were allowed into the temple, into Yerushalayim, and it was Tisha B'Av. And the Romans did it deliberately because they enjoyed seeing the Jews weeping and wailing at the ruins of their temple. At the same time, we have another. I have time for that before I take a break. We have another statement from a rabbi we know lived during the destruction. That's Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. He famously, according to tradition, he was smuggled out of the city and brokered sort of a deal with the Romans. According to history, probably was much less dramatic. The city was conquered and they spared his life and they let him live in Yavne. But Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai says the following: Im hayta neti'a betoch yadcha. If you are holding a sapling, you're about to plant a tree.
Something tells you the Messiah's
And so you know this.
Yeah, so, first plant the tree.
Right, and someone says Messiah is on his way. Right? ואמרו לך, Mashiach בא, Mashiach is coming. טע את הנטיעה, first plant the sapling, וצא הקבל את פניו.
What's this from?
Pirkei Avot?
No, it's not Pirkei Avot. It's in the Midrash. I'll give you the source in a second. So, what is Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai saying? What is the... and we know that it's right after the destruction. Between 70 and 1... Really, the 70 and 110 or something like that. What is he saying?
Here and now, and the future is more important.
But he addresses real problem. A a real problem. You're right. It's the here and there, and now is important. But what was the problem? The problem was that many people came and claimed that they are the Mashiach, and every time that this happened, people dropped everything and went to war because they thought this time we're going to defeat the Romans.
Oh, this is right. But this happened much later than you're talking about 130.
It appears in Masechtot Ktanot, Avod de Rabbi Natan, Nusha Bet.
I'm thinking of like Shabtai Tzvi, which happened much later. than
Oh,
1500s.
Shabbatai Tzvi was the exact same thing.
But that was much later. That was 1500s, right?
Yeah, but any Messianic
Excuse me.
Avod de Rabbi Natan, Bet, Perek Lamed Aleph, chapter 31. Avod de Rabbi Natan is sort of a midrashic extension of chapters Pirkei Avot. But it seems like it goes to a much more ancient period. The interesting thing here that also over there he says, if you want a war, if you want to battle against the pagans, don't destroy their temples, because you won one battle, you didn't win the war yet. So like that, even though the Torah says that you have to do it, he said, be careful.
So if the Romans didn't want to destroy the temple, then why did they?
It was the only way to win.
Because it was the only way to win, to break the spirit of the Jews. And even that was not good enough. What did Moshe tell the Jews? Am keshe'or refata. You're a stubborn people. We are stubborn.
Does the draft still work the same way?
Where? In Israel now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, if you study all day, then you could come and claim this exemption.
Wasn't there something going on where they tried to change it?
Yes.
And it didn't work?
Not yet. Not yet. When it works, it will be beneficial for the city of Israel.